25 years ago, the Office of the European Ombudsman was established. On its anniversary, I want to highlight the great work that has been done over all these years, from maximum transparency and empathy with European citizens. The Ombudsman has proved to be an independent and impartial institution that has always promoted good public administration in the European Union. The European Ombudsman plays a fundamental role in the functioning of the European Union. It is, with no doubt, a pillar for a Europe of the people that we need to continue building. For the Committee on Petitions, which I have the honor to chair, the Ombudsman is a key player in serving citizens, listening to them and addressing their concerns through investigating complaints about European administration, working with national ombudsmen, improving transparency in the European Union's trade relations. It is a great responsibility that we must value and defend from the European institutions. I wish a great present and future of success. Your success will be the success of all Europeans.
El defensor del pueblo es tu escudo frente a posibles ataques a tus derechos democráticos. Es tu altavoz.
It is your vote which can shine a light on injustices, and it is your guarantee of good management in public administration. The European Ombudsman is your right to defend your rights. Exercise them.
The past 25 years have proven that the establishment of the Office of EU Ombudsman was a very big achievement. The role of the EU institutions, the complaints on maladministration can be addressed, is extremely important. My own experience of fruitful cooperation with the EU Ombudsman has a time span of 16 years, since I was first elected to the European Parliament, and then my choice was to enter the Petit Committee directly dealing with the concerns of EU residents. My congratulations to Emily O'Reilly, your predecessors, and the staff on this anniversary.
Over the last 25 years, the European Ombudsman has given a voice to the concerns of citizens and civil society. The Ombudsman's scrutiny is a great asset for all EU institutions and an essential tool to strengthen public trust in the regulatory system. Congratulations on the 25th anniversary.
The European Ombudsman has done great work in putting human and fundamental rights at the heart of her work for good administration in the EU. Looking to the future, I would like to see her increasingly move from human and fundamental rights promotion to protection. I would like, eventually, the European Ombudsman to be one of the guarantors of human rights for everyone in the European Union.
Happy 25th birthday. Democracy and the European citizens' trust need a strong ombudsman to uphold ethical and transparency standards in EU bodies like the European Chemicals Agency. Keep up the good work.
Data Protection Authority as the expert in the field of data protection and privacy, and the Ombudsman with the knowledge of what's going on among the people and what are the problems and how to fight with them in the court is probably the good road for the future.
The European Ombudsman does important work by bringing the European institutions closer to their citizens. I see the future of the European Ombudsman in complementing a case-by-case approach with promoting more something at the systemic level. Transparency will enable accountability of the EU institutions, thereby creating trust and narrowing the gap between citizens and their institutions.
Hello, good legislation needs accountability on all levels of policymaking. The Ombudsman plays a key role fighting for pluralism and democracy, checks and balances. We wish her even more impact and visibility. In the same time, I personally dream of less work for her and her team, because that would be a perfect world.
The European Ombudsman has done a huge amount to defend the citizens' right of access to EU documents. What is needed now is for the Ombudsman to have binding powers in order to continue to advance transparency and openness of the European Union.
If the European Ombudsman had not been created, it would need to be invented. Happy 25th anniversary, European Ombudsman. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the conference on the future of the European Ombudsman. As you've seen and heard, the Office of the European Ombudsman is 25 years old. That's an important anniversary, a moment to look back at the successes and achievements, but also a moment to look ahead to the future challenges. And that's what we'll be doing here this morning over the next 90 minutes through speeches and interventions and discussions and interaction with all of you watching us online. I'm Shada Islam. I'm Brussels-based. I'm an EU commentator and analyst. And I've been working with the European Ombudsman on these conferences, the annual ones, and sometimes twice a year for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's my pleasure, my honor, my privilege to also moderate and facilitate this discussion, this digital conference this morning. I have to give you some housekeeping rules. Very challenging in these digital times, but let me read them out to you just to make sure that I get everything right. So as regards interpretation, there will be interpretation into English, French, German, Spanish, and Italian. In the document that you have received, you can find the instructions on how to switch languages. To explain just very briefly, you'll find a button to switch language on the top left of your Interactio window. So I hope you see it there and you can switch along and listen in the language of your preference. So as regards the interaction, this morning we'll be communicating exclusively through slido.com. So you ask your questions in there. You've received a link in the email with the instructions, and you can also go on slido.com and enter the event hashtag, which is EO25 years. The hashtag and a QR code will be shown on that screen. So if you have any technical problems, please contact the number of the IT service that you have also received this morning. And also to get you used to using Slido, we will now carry out a little poll that Kevin will put on the screen for you. And we'll be asking you, what are the major transparency and accountability challenges facing the EU administrations? So the options, as you can read, are A, maintaining transparency standards in a post-COVID world, B, tackling the blame Brussels culture, C, monitoring how EU funds are spent, D, revolving doors, E, lobbying transparency, and F, monitoring how migration policy is implemented. I'll come back to the results of the poll when I start the panel discussion on the future of the Ombudsman. So please do start responding, and I see with great pleasure that you're already doing so. Thank you very much indeed. Now, enough from me. I'm going to turn the screen over to Emily O'Reilly, the Ombudsman. Emily, the screen is yours.
Me? Yes, I think you are. So good morning, everybody from Strasbourg, and a very big thank you to all of you who have joined us from the four corners of Europe to help us to celebrate a big day in the life of the European Ombudsman. And before I begin, I'd also like to thank all of those institutional and agency leaders who sent us such warm wishes. That means a lot to us. So the 25th anniversary is, of course, a time to celebrate, but more importantly, it's a time to reflect on the past and to use the lessons of the past to chart a course for the next big milestone. And I very much look forward to your ideas and thoughts on what that course might look like. I would like to begin also by acknowledging the role played in the development of the office by my predecessors, Mr. Soderman and Professor de Alamdouros. Both men brought their own unique approach to the work and left strong foundations on which I and my colleagues have continued to build. I also want to acknowledge the role of the European Parliament in the success of the office, and particularly by the Petitions Committee. And we are very honoured to have the present chair of the committee, Madame Montserrat, joining us today. From the very start of my first mandate, I have stressed the critical importance of that Ombudsman-Parliament link, and its strength has been the cornerstone of this office's success over the last 25 years. Collaboration with the European Network of Ombudsmen has also been an intensely valuable part of the work, and today's event is also our annual conference. In recent years, this annual conference has been held in Brussels, and today, for obvious reasons, but for the first time, it is 100% digital. As Irish Ombudsman for 10 years and now as European Ombudsman for the last 7 years, I've always appreciated the friendship and solidarity of the network, and I've been pleased to build on that solidarity through the initiation of joint investigations between my office and those of the national and regional offices, a practice that I hope to build on in the years ahead. I am therefore very pleased to also have the current president of the International Ombudsman Institute, Mr. Peter Tyndall, joining us today. Another key actor in the success of the office has been civil society. Unlike national and regional ombudsmen, our links to citizens are not always as direct, and the complaints that we deal with do not always stem from their everyday concerns, such as social welfare, health, and housing. But civil society has nonetheless provided that vital bridge, often bringing issues to our attention that, when resolved, can and do have positive impacts for all European citizens. We bring different perspectives at times, but I believe that we share the joint ambition of making the administration more responsive to citizens' needs and encouraging it to be as open and transparent as possible when doing so. Again, I am very pleased to have two of the leaders of EU civil society, Michel van Hulten of Transparency International and Professor Alberto Alemano from the HEC Paris, in attendance today. But an office is successful not because of the work of one person, but of many, and I am proud to lead an office of engaged and committed public servants who have so ably supported my work and that of my predecessors. They bring expertise and insight without which the office could not operate as effectively as it does. And all of this is underpinned by their own professional and personal commitment to the very highest values of the Union. So I thank them for all their work and for all their support. Our discussion this morning is intended to focus on the future of this office. And as I look to the next 4 years of my mandate, this for me is a vital discussion. When I first came into office in 2013, I had a very clear strategy. I won't call it ambitious because, to my mind, I intended to do only what an engaged and committed European Ombudsman should do. And that is quite simply to comply with what the treaties and the Charter of Fundamental Rights compels it to do. To make sure that EU citizens are treated fairly by the EU administration and that the rights of good administration and openness are respected. If I was ambitious, it was in my intention not to sit back and wait passively for complaints to arrive at my door. Much of the EU administration is distant geographically and psychologically for EU citizens, and this small office is no exception. So to maximise its potential, to give real life to its intended role, I needed to be proactive in that task. To that end, I knew that the power of own initiative investigation granted by the treaties was critical, and to date, the intensification of own initiative strategic inquiries by this office has played a very significant role in increasing its visibility, its relevance, and its impact. It has brought wider attention to our work, led to a big increase in the number of complaints of significant wider public interest, and also helped to solve systemic issues that had failed to be resolved for many years. Parallel to that work, we moved to improve our complaint handling processes, making them more efficient, and in the crucial area of access to documents, we introduced a fast-track procedure to get cases finalised as quickly as possible. As a result, the service we provide to individual complainants has been improved, and I intend to make further improvements over the next 4 years. But when I look back at the strategic work in particular over the last 7 years, I see that if there is a common theme, it relates to the accountability of the EU's complex decision-making process. Many EU leaders lament the sometimes weak links between the EU institutions and the people, yet fail to see that this problem is compounded by a lack of openness about what they're doing. They are asking people, in effect, blindly to trust them, asking at times for acceptance of laws and measures that have been agreed, often without their input, despite the citizens' treaty right to participate in the democratic life of the Union. Our work has therefore included the transparency of the so-called trilogue negotiations between the Commission, Parliament and Council on draft EU laws, transparency of the legislative process in the Council itself, and the transparency of the Eurogroup, the way in which the interests of expert groups that advise the Commission are balanced and managed, the challenging issue of revolving doors when staff move between the institutions and the private sector, the transparency of institutional lobbying, the transparency of EU trade negotiations, among many others. All of these revolve around the core issues of making sure that EU citizens are made as fully aware as possible of how the laws that affect them are made and who or what is influencing the making of those laws. This, of course, is a process of evolution and not revolution, but already we have seen some significant changes. The German presidency has achieved agreement for some positive changes vis-à-vis council transparency. Commissioners and senior Commission personnel now publish their lobbying meetings. There is greater public scrutiny of moves between the EU administration and the private sector. And trade negotiations now include transparency as a key principle, at least on the EU side. So, as we reach this 25-year punctuation point, but a lot achieved, but a lot left to do, I look forward to your thoughts on our future. Like every other office, we face the challenge of making our work visible to the citizens who need us, of encouraging the administration to accept our recommendations, even if they don't like them, but have nonetheless been well-founded on fact and with cogent analysis. Increasingly also, we live in an age where independent oversight is either being downgraded or ignored, and citizens cannot know who to trust or to believe. So how do I and my colleagues steer the small office in the direction of greater positive impact? At the moment, the legislators are negotiating over a revision of our statute that is the legal basis of our office. And so now I believe is the time to ask, is there a need even for the office to be reimagined in some way, having proved itself, we believe, over the last 25 years? If this office were being created now in the year 2021, what would and should it look like? The first person to address these issues this morning is someone that I first met as European Ombudsman back in 2013, just a few weeks after I took office, when he was Vice President of the European Commission, and today he is still Vice President of the European Commission, charged with the important portfolio of interinstitutional relations and foresight. And I think the latter responsibility is particularly relevant to our discussions today. So I am honoured to introduce him to you as our keynote speaker, Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič.
Can you say something, please, sir?
Can you? Yeah. Is it working now?
Yes, it's working. The floor is yours. Sir, I open your mic for you, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. And first and foremost, I really would like to thank the technicians for allowing us to have these video conferences, but I'm sure that all of us would be so pleased if we can also mark this very important anniversary in person. So once again, I really would like to thank Madam O'Reilly, dear Emily, for your kind invitation to participate in this very important conference, and also to appreciate our common work over the last quite a few years. And I also remember very vividly our first meeting after your first election, and your ambitious approach which you presented at that time, but also now in your introductory remarks. So I think that also thanks to the great work of you and of your predecessor, which you kindly mentioned in your introductory intervention, be it Mr. Jakub Söderman from Finland or Mr. Nikiforos Diamandouros from Greece. Thanks to your contributions and to your courage and energy you brought in to the office, today we can really speak about your office as being integral piece in the structure of the European democracy. And I think that the work of the Ombudsman, as you referred to it a couple of minutes ago, is now more important than ever. We see how the situation in our member states, in our union, is getting difficult because of COVID-19 crisis, because of the economic slowdown, because the worries people have on their mind when they're thinking about the employment, about school, and about their future. And it's only natural that at this stage they expect the most from the national but also European leaders. And they deserve effective union which works for them, and on top of it, in open and transparent manner. And here I would like to underline the fact that Ombudsman really serves as a bulwark of ensuring that this is the case, that any citizens who had that treasure European citizenship can turn to your office, to the European Ombudsman, to ensure that their rights are respected, and that the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union is fully applied, that they have guarantee for the right to vote in European and local elections, that they have right to petition the European Parliament, or the right to submit a complaint of maladministration. And I also would like to greet from Berlaymont, from Brussels, also chair of the petition committee, Madame Montserrat, who is also bringing a lot of new ideas how the petitions committees and ombudsman can work even better with the European Commission, so we would offer the best service possible to our citizens. And I think that that link, which was institutionally established, but was really built and strengthened over the years by the concrete actions, by the role played by the European Parliament in electing the European Ombudsman, but also by the right of the members of the European Parliament to ask Ombudsman to launch the inquiries. And I think that over the last 25 years, really a lot has been done, and I consider the office of the European Ombudsman as one of the key offices and key links and key leverages which really help us to maintain public trust in the European Union. The Ombudsman has become a valuable point of contact for all Europeans in what is sometimes perceived as very complex institutional structure. I know that how many petitions the Petitions Committee receives, how many letters the Office of the Ombudsman receives, and how professionally you are managing all of them and trying to provide the citizen with the best possible answer. All that needs a lot of energy, positive attitude, and I know that the current Ombudsman, Madame O'Reilly, has not only plenty of energy, but also big drive in making sure that the Office of the Ombudsman works better and better. She has shown great commitment and dedication in her 8 years and counting in the role. And I really would like to thank and convey, I'm sure, the gratitude on behalf of all EU institutions for your valuable work, Mrs. O'Reilly, but also for the work of your colleagues in the Ombudsman office. And I have to say that I am delivering this message of gratitude on behalf of what I would describe is your biggest client, the European Commission, because we are working very closely together, and most of the issues which we are dealing with is how to make sure that our citizens would get the service they expect from the top quality European administration. And I very much appreciate that where issues do arise, that we can work hand in hand with the Ombudsman to ensure that the views of our citizens are taken into account, and that we are always looking for the positive and possible solutions. The close cooperation allows us to work together to resolve vast majority of complaints without the need for maladministration decisions. And we appreciate this also very much. And this often means to strive to improve the way we work. And some of the examples been already mentioned by our Ombudsman, but just to add a couple of more. For example, we pledged to start publishing more information about commissioners' travel expenses in what was described by the Ombudsman as a very positive step. We overhauled the rules around the hundreds of expert groups to improve our oversight based on proposals presented, again, by the Ombudsman. And we worked with the Ombudsman to launch the fast-track procedures concerning access to the document inquiries. So to this end, the Commission is also developing an online portal called Electronic Access to Commission Documents. We believe that this would be making easier for all Europeans who would like to learn more about the documents, who would like to learn about the access to them, submitting new requests, launching appeal against Commission replies, or searching for previously disclosed documents requested by other applicants. The portal will go live in the second half of in the second quarter of 2021, and I believe it would further strengthen transparency in the European Union. And I know that these are just few examples which we can present in a very tight schedule of your conference, but just to give you one figure how important the work of Ombudsman is, I would just use the figure from 2019. Because only in that year, the Ombudsman helped nearly 20,000 people, launching and resolving hundreds of inquiries. And I think that this is a very impressive number indeed. And I have no doubt that Mrs. O'Reilly will continue to build on this impressive body of work. And I can assure you that in all her endeavors, she will have the full support of the European Commission. The Ombudsman Biennial Award for the Good Administration, for example, is a very good example how to inspire the civil servants, how to motivate them, how to foster good administration, but also how to give recognition for the good work and the good services. And I am not just saying that because the Commission has won the first two overall awards, but I know how much they've been appreciated and valued by my colleagues who received them and who are working in different DGs in the European Commission. And ultimately, all the different institutions, bodies, agencies of the European Union have the same goal as the European Ombudsman. And that means achieving the highest possible administrative standards in our relations with citizens, associations, and businesses, then increasing the confidence and belief in the European institutions while making the benefits of the EU more tangible for Europeans. Having said all this, I know that none of us is perfect. And then there will be always mistakes made and problems to fix when it comes to the public administration. But by working together, we can minimize and resolve these to the advantage of all Europeans. And on behalf of not only of the Commission, but other institutions, I would like to conclude by underlining our wholehearted commitment to work together with you ever more closely, Emily, as we look forward to the next 25 years of the European Ombudsman. So good luck, lots of positive energy, great creative ideas, and we are very much looking forward to hear them and to work on them together with you and with your office. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner Šefčovič. You've given us some real good food for thought as we go ahead in our discussions today. Before I turn to the panel, I'd like to ask Kevin, once again, if you could, put on the 1 minute long video on the history of the Office of the European Ombudsman. There you go. So welcome back. We're going to start our panel in a minute or two, but before that, we also have video messages from European Commission President von der Leyen and European Parliament President Mr. Sassoli. Before we do that, let me introduce to you the panelists on this panel that is going to be delving deeper, if you like, into the issue of the future of the European Ombudsman. Now, we heard Commissioner Šefčovič talk about how important the office is for the support and the integral part of European democracy. And Emily O'Reilly herself said that she wants to reimagine the office of the European Ombudsman in these challenging times. So our panel will explore these issues a bit further. Let me introduce you to them very, very quickly. For the speakers on this panel, may I ask you to use your headphones, because otherwise we won't be able to engage in a two-way conversation. First and foremost, we have Dolores Montserrat. She is chair of the European Parliament's Petitions Committee. Dolores, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm hoping Peter Tindall is here as well. He is president of the International Ombudsman's Institute. Peter, welcome. Also from civil society, as Emily said, two very important representatives, Michiel van Hulten, Director of Transparency International EU, and Alberto Almano, Professor of Law and Public Policy at HEC Paris. Before I start the panel discussion with these four very experienced representatives, let us hear the video messages from President von der Leyen and President Sassoli.
I wish the European Ombudsman a very happy 25th anniversary, and I congratulate on 25 years of work for the citizens of the European Union. Your role is so important and so fundamental to ensure that our European institutions live up to the highest standards of good administration. With your help and with your contribution, we want to fulfill the expectations of Europe's citizens. I'm looking forward to our cooperation also in the coming years.
Cara signora O'Reilly, cari amici.
Dear Mrs. O'Reilly, dear friends and colleagues, I'd like to thank you for your invitation to speak at this important digital conference, which allows us to reflect on the essential role that the European Ombudsman plays in ensuring the proper functioning of the European administration, allowing it to address current and future challenges. In these difficult months, we've always stressed the need to bring the European institutions closer to citizens, and this is what you have done since 1995. These 25 years mark an important milestone that must be celebrated because your efforts and objectives have been dedicated to improving transparency, strengthening ethics and accountability, the quality of the EU administration, and its accessibility for the benefit of all. We share the same commitment and the same goal, to make the European Union a place where citizens feel safe, where they can develop their ambitions and desires, a place where their rights are always protected and respected. They believe in us and our administration and in the way that we're able to respond to global challenges. The trust of citizens is fundamental for the future of our Union, and a modern, transparent and accountable administration is essential to continue to cultivate this sentiment and allow the development of that sense of community, which is particularly needed during the difficult times we're experiencing with the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to thank you for your dedication over all these years, and I would like to thank the European Ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly, for her constant commitment and hard work since 2013. The European Ombudsman is a partner and a friend of the European Parliament, and for this reason I hope that our institutions can cooperate even more closely. Happy 25th anniversary, and I hope to see you soon in person.
Thank you very much indeed, President von der Leyen and President Sassoli. So back to the panel. If I could just say to all of you watching and listening online, please do send us your comments and your questions, because I'd like to put them to the panel once I've gone through the first round of questions from myself. And we will be showing the results of the Slido opinion poll, and we'll be asking our panelists to respond to that as well. So let's kick off. If I could turn to you first, Dolores Montserrat, Chair of the Petitions Committee of the European Parliament. Of course, the Petitions Committee has to play a very crucial role in the support of democracy, in ensuring European democracy. And I was wondering, Dolores, if you could tell us a little bit about your role. How do you see your role in this very crucial moment? And also, how do you see your relationship with the European Ombudsman evolving over the coming years? Screen's yours, Dolores.
Hello, good morning. I hope so that you are hearing me. I'm here in Spain, and first of all, I want to congratulate to Mrs. O'Reilly to be, this ombudsman during, in this celebration. So it's very important, and thank you to Commissioner Šefčovič to be today with us. It's very important because in this pandemic, to celebrate 25 years of Ombudsman, it's very important because it's one of the most important bridge between the citizens and all the European institutions. So thank you very much, and congratulations. And for me, it's an honor to be the chair of Petty Committee. That it's another bridge between the citizens and the European institutions, and we are working all together. Mrs. O'Reilly and me and all the members of the Ombudsman Office and all the members of the Petty Committee to help all our citizens to be close to our institutions and to help the institutions to be more transparency. Now I'm going to use the Spanish because I think that we have to use the official languages because we are plural, and our committee and Ombudsman always we are open to speak with all the languages, official languages in the European Union.
The relationship between the Ombudsman and the Petty Committee is very good indeed. The Ombudsman comes regularly to our committee, not just to present her annual report, but also to take part in a series of hearings. It's very important to us that she come not only once a year, but also that she be there in hearings so that there's direct contact between the Petty Committee and the Ombudsman, and we can see what the current situation is when it comes to infringement of rights, etc., and any issues affecting European citizens. I would like to congratulate the Ombudsman for the very concrete measures that have been taken by her office and for implementing her 5-year strategy towards 2024, which gives us a more strategic focus when it comes to looking at systemic problems. The annual management plan for 2019 is the fifth and last the strategy or the current strategy is based on. So we need a strategy looking towards the future. It will help Europeans feel close to the European institutions and will ensure greater transparency, especially in the current situation, in the pandemic that we're all going through. We in the Petitions Committee, when the pandemic was declared and when we had to enter lockdown, we in the Petitions Committee saw that we had to acknowledge the different requests and petitions that reached us from European citizens affected by COVID. For instance, masks were missing. There was not enough personal protection equipment, especially at the outset. And we need to ensure that there is sufficient PPE to protect our citizens. And then there were very many petitions and inquiries about the closing of schools. There were parents also who could not really homeschool their children for lack of computers, etc., etc. For instance, also at the beginning of the pandemic, when there was lockdown, for instance, there was a German citizen stuck in France or elsewhere who couldn't go home and be with his family. And then this summer, too, there were different restrictions imposed. There were some lockdowns that lasted 2 weeks. Other periods of quarantine or lockdown lasted longer, so there was no uniformity. So we broached all these subjects. We looked at them, and we in the Petitions Committee and the representatives of the different groups were very clear in their minds that they had to deal immediately with all requests and petitions received from our citizens. We are in a very complex situation at the moment, and the European citizen had to feel that Europe was there for them. So we wanted to help European citizens as much as possible. And I feel very proud that I have worked so closely together with the Commissioner and with the Ombudsman to try and respond to our citizens' concerns and to do that as speedily as possible to reassure them. I'm very happy to work with all parliamentary groups and the staff of the European Parliament in the Petitions Committee too, in order to reach out to European citizens from the European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dolores. You've pointed to some very important issues that face us today in challenging times of the pandemic. But I think also since, there are a second wave and possibly, God forbid, a third wave, of course, we have to see what will happen in the future. And you've talked about citizens' concerns to do with the lack of masks and protection equipment, also education at home, citizens stuck in each other's countries, and of course, the lack of uniformity in lockdowns and need for all institutions, the Ombudsman and yourselves and the European Commission to work together. So some very important points made there. I'd like to come back to a few of them later on, but let me continue. Peter Tindall, are you available to come online now? The question I have for you, Peter, and it's nice to see you again. You're in Dublin. Just wanted to ask you, because we've talked about the challenges of democracy, and we know very well, Peter, we've talked about this before, that the challenges in some of our member states are very strong to the rule of law, to democracy, and to human rights. And I was wondering, you as the president of the International Ombudsman Institute, how do you view these challenges and how do you take this conversation forward in terms of supporting, ensuring democracy? Peter, screen's yours.
I think for many years we took for granted the assumption that the rule of law and democracy would be unhindered across the European Union. Unfortunately, we've seen in recent years that there have been many challenges to this. I was particularly struck, for instance, in the context of Brexit, with the fact that even in the UK now, there is a challenge potentially to the rule of law. The European Ombudsman, for the 25 years of its existence, has been a key element in the international community of ombudsman offices within a European context. The Ombudsman has been supportive of colleagues who face threats. It's inevitable that as an Ombudsman, from time to time, you're going to say things that your government doesn't want to hear. But what you expect is that because you're coming to the issues in a dispassionate, balanced way, because you're looking at things from the point of view of good administration, from the point of view of the rule of law, and from the point of view of human and fundamental rights, that those views will be respected. We've seen that that hasn't always been the case, and part of the role of the International Ombudsman Institution in recent years has focused very much on supporting colleagues who are either having their offices undermined, sometimes insidiously. For instance, you can reduce the budget of an office such that it's very difficult for it to carry out its task. Equally, you can give it more responsibilities and not give it the necessary resources, which also make it more difficult. Now, the voice of the European Ombudsman within the Ombudsman community as a supporter of the offices and as a supporter of the rule of law is a very, very significant one. Normally, at this time, we would have come together as a European network of ombudsmen in Brussels. This year, we're having, for obvious reasons, to do it virtually. But the mutual support, the mutual learning, and the mutual reinforcement of best practice is a very important part of the role of the European Ombudsman. The Ombudsman's office has been pioneering in the way it's gone about its work. It has developed significantly in recent years, and I think it has provided a model and support for the rest of the Ombudsman community in Europe.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. I'll come back to you also with some follow-up questions, and I'm sure those who are watching and listening online will do so as well. But thank you very much for that first intervention. Michiel van Hulten, turning to you now, Director of Transparency International EU. Emily O'Reilly said, let's reimagine the role of the European Ombudsman in the coming years. And of course, we face many challenges, not least to do with the pandemic, but also, as I said, erosion of the rule of law and democracy in some parts of the European Union itself. So if I were to say to you as Director of Transparency International, what's your main ambition that you have for the Ombudsman, European Ombudsman in the coming years? And what's its biggest strengths as an institution as you see it? Michiel, the screen's yours.
Mr. Van Hulten, we cannot hear you. Give us a second for refreshing your connection. Thank you. The floor is yours, sir, please.
Is this better?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I don't know how much you heard of what I just said, but...
We didn't hear you, Michiel. Just repeat yourself from the beginning, please. Go ahead. Okay, we've lost you again, Michiel. Try again, please.
Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's hope it works this time. So happy birthday to the Ombudsman and to all the staff of the Ombudsman for the excellent work you've done in the last 25 years. I think to answer your question, Shada, to me the key quality that the Ombudsman possesses and brings to the work in Brussels and beyond is its independence, the ability to speak truth to power, to hold power to account without fear or favor, and to make sure that the institutions are accountable and transparent. And when you ask about the main challenge for the future, I think the main challenge is to build trust and regain trust of citizens in the EU institutions. And that really is fundamental to the work that the institutions do. We can make all the policy we want in Brussels, but if citizens don't have the feeling that the institutions represent them and that they do their work in a way that is efficient and effective, then it's not going to go anywhere. And so I think our common mission, together with other civil society organizations, with society as a whole, is to make sure that we ensure that there is trust in the EU institutions. And that means, among other things, strengthening the work of the Ombudsman to make sure that the institutions function well, function in a way that is ethical, that is responsible, and that makes good use of public resources.
Thank you very much, Michiel, for that first intervention. I'll move on quickly to Alberto, but I just wanted to say to all of you, please do send your questions through slido.com. Slido, we really want some interaction and to get some of your views on what you see as the future of the Office of the European Ombudsman. So, Alberto, from your point of view, you've written a lot about democracy, written a lot about access to documents, the need for transparency, and also that this is the only institution, you said, which is citizen-centered, and that it should become more participatory, you said, even more participatory, as you said. So, Alberto, from your point of view, just clarify a little bit, give us a bit more detail of what your ambitions are for the European Ombudsman going forward.
First, congratulate the European Ombudsman Office for its first 25th anniversary, and
excuse me, Mr. Almano, you don't have a camera on, so we cannot provide the interpretation if the camera is not on. Could you please turn your camera on? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Shada, and good morning, everyone. I just wanted to congratulate the European Ombudsman for its first 25th anniversary and its organic incremental evolution over these years in which the office came of age. As anticipated by Shada, I think after 25 years, the European Ombudsman remains the only European institution which is citizen-driven, which is citizen-friendly, and as such is the type of inclusive, participatory and user-friendly channel that the European needs probably more than ever. So continuity more than disruption, evolution more than revolution, as Emily O'Reilly puts it this morning, is my suggestion when looking into the future. At the same time, when we look at the context in which the Ombudsman is set to operate today and the erosion of the rule of law, it is pretty clear that we need not only to preserve the European Ombudsman, but also adapt it to the new challenges also for its current mandate and the exercise of his own prerogative of holding accountable the European institutions themselves. So in a way, the existence of an extrajudicial institution like the Ombudsman is probably greater today. The need for such an institution is greater today than it was 25 years ago. In particular, the idea of having an institution that is leveraging on moral suasion as opposed to coercion is probably more needed today than in the past. It might sound counterintuitive, but today the judicial itself is not able to attain its own result, whereas the result, when you look at the compliance rate with its own decision. So there's a lot of value in the European Ombudsman potential, but we need to take full advantage of such a model. And one of my suggestions today is trying to figuring out how it could become more participatory, meaning leveraging more on the energy which are spread across Europe in order to collectivize complaints, in order to mobilize this demand, which is probably systemic, asking for systemic change, exactly the way the Ombudsman is taking, and also being open to coalition-based work, and potentially in the long term, also to consider in the framework of the current revision of the statute, some possible linkages with the European Court of Justice in those pathological circumstances in which the Ombudsman decisions are not followed by, not even when the European Parliament has been involved. So I'm pretty sure over the next few minutes, we're going to have the chance to go further on some of these proposals and how we could potentially make the European Ombudsman Office even more participatory, even more embedded into civil society in order to increase awareness about its existence and what the Ombudsman, with many forces of civil society, could actually achieve in this new challenging time in which the rule of law is really at stake all across Europe.
Thank you very much indeed, Alberto. So we've already heard from 4 panelists. Emily, I'll give you the floor at the end of the panel discussion for your views. But we've heard from Dolores on the need for more efficiency. She said, the need for democracy. We've heard from Peter talking about the challenges that exist to the rule of law within the European Union. The views of ombudsman, he said, aren't always respected, and the importance of support for colleagues and mutual learning. Michiel has talked about the need for building trust, and strengthening the ombudsman so that they can speak with no fear or favor. And we have had now Alberto speaking also about the need for, interestingly, he said, we need the ombudsman, the European ombudsman, more today than ever before. The moral suasion is very, very important. And he's stressed the need for more participatory work and collective complaints. So some very interesting ideas that are emerging already on how this office should evolve in the coming even more challenging years. Now let's go, Kevin, to the results of the Slido, and let me turn to the panelists for their comments on what we see. Let's see what we have here. So we had asked several questions, and you all have said that tackling the blame Brussels culture, accountability and decision-making is very, very important for the ethical challenges for the EU administration. That 32% have said that. And then you've talked about transparency standards in a post-COVID world, 20% on a par with monitoring how EU funds are spent, lobbying transparency, 14%, monitoring migration policy, 12%, and revolving doors, 3%. So let me turn now to Dolores, Peter, Alberto, and Michiel, and also actually to you, Emily, for a very quick comment on what you see here on our Slido.com opinion poll. So start with you, Dolores. The screen is yours.
No. Thank you very much again. Yo creo que
I think that what the survey says is that European citizens are asking us for transparency. They're asking us as European institutions to uphold and protect the European Union values, rule of law then. And then when we speak of transparency, that should mean that when citizens ask information of their governments or the EU institutions, they must receive that information. Let me give you an example. For instance, the Brexit Working Group has now published more than 100 documents resulting from the negotiation, the timetable of Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator, and when meetings have been organized, etc., to increase transparency. All this is very important, and that's what we have seen in the results of the survey. Let me add, and this is very important to me now, that what we've done in Europe with regard to COVID. This is a huge package that we have tabled to help our citizens out. And that's very important. As European citizens have said too, we have to see how European funds are invested, where they're invested. The resources should be used to strengthen national health systems. They should be used too to consolidate economic growth in the member states of the European Union and strengthen that industrial European autonomy and independence. And we need funds to generate new jobs and retain those that already exist with a view to the clean circular economy, a green one in the digital age. And as regards the Petitions Committee, and as someone who also responds to surveys, the results that we see here are very important to me as president or chair of the Petitions Committee. I see that we need to respect the rule of law, because the rule of law makes us equal and it gives us freedom. This is one of the fundamental principles, fundamental values of the European Union. The European citizens are asking us to continue to uphold that. And we do that in the Petitions Committee, as does the Ombudsman's Office. And then transparency, again, that is of the utmost importance. The citizens has to know why an administration does what it does, how it does it, and how funds are invested. Those funds belong to European citizens, and they should know that they are being properly invested. And we should also make sure that they know that we want to uphold the rule of law. We want to strengthen our health systems at national level, and we may want to make of Europe something cleaner, something greener, something fairer, that fights climate change and leave no one behind. The best social policy we can leave European citizens is employment, and we can use our resources for that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to go back to the panel for their comments, but there's some interesting questions that my colleagues have already sent to me. Thank you very much for sending us those. So we have a few questions on the proposed independent ethics panel and how will that work in terms of the mandate of the European Ombudsman. So when you answer the question on the Slido opinion poll, please add this in. And then there's a very interesting question also about political attacks from populist parties, as is happening in a few member states. And does the Ombudsman Office have sufficient safeguards to deal with those issues? So as you come back to the Slido poll, please take those questions into account as well. Peter Tyndall, screen is yours.
Thank you. It's interesting, the results of the poll, but not terribly surprising. And in some ways, the issue about the blame Brussels culture and the issue about the attacks by populist government are very much linked to each other. I think it seems to me that some of the initiatives that have been taken by the European Ombudsman, like the Good Administration Awards, which we heard about in the earlier presentations, do something towards setting up a counter-argument. But if you're going to make sure that you have openness and transparency at the heart of European administration, then you have to have an empowered ombudsman office which is able to deal with that. I think one of the ways we have to work is by supporting our colleagues in those countries where the attacks are happening. Quite often, their offices are under tremendous stress, and there is the capacity for international organizations and the European Union in general, the Commission, but also the European Ombudsman to act in support of colleagues who are principally trying to protect the rule of law in countries where populist administrations have little respect for it some of the time. Now, on the issue of transparency and the issue of does the Ombudsman have sufficient protections, I think there's a point to be made here about the lack of a proper transparency regime at a European level. For people like myself as Ombudsman, I'm also the Information Commissioner for Ireland. As Information Commissioner, I have binding powers. Now, as Ombudsman, as we've heard, the power of moral suasion is very effective. And in general, in Ireland, and in fact, in the more than 30 years of the office, all of the recommendations of the office have been accepted. But on freedom of information, I think the judgment was made when that regime was introduced that binding powers were necessary. And I think that's a question that needs to be asked at a European level. I would like to see a regime which required greater transparency and which was embedded within legislation and which had a clear role for the European Ombudsman in implementing that requirement. So I think there's a number of points there. I want to pick up on the ethics issue as well. It's clear that in a number of countries in Europe and more widely, ombudsman offices can play a key role in ensuring that ethics frameworks are implemented. My office, for instance, supports the commission responsible for ethics in Ireland, of which I'm a member, and that commission also operates the lobbying register. So I think having those kind of protections, there is a role for the European Ombudsman offices. You don't need to keep setting up new regimes. You can use the ones you've got that are operating effectively. it's very difficult to see how the Ombudsman alone could roll back but on some of the issues we're facing. But if we are to protect democracy, the rule of law and fundamental rights and freedoms, then the European Ombudsman's Office keep ensuring that there is openness, transparency and ethical behaviour at a European level can play a vital role in dealing with the issues around the reputation of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Peter. An interesting idea there also. I think we should explore further the need for binding powers embedded in legislation, and then the openness, transparency and ethical role to be, sort of monitoring. And I think one of the things we have to remember when we look at the European Ombudsman and its role is also the global inspiration that provides. I mean, within Europe, obviously, our network itself, but I think across the world, this idea of Ombudsman is building up support. And I think people will be looking to Europe as a regulatory force in the world for inspiration as they build up their own Ombudsman networks and the offices. Let me turn now to Michiel. Michiel, your opinion on the opinion poll, and also if you could answer the question about the ethical standards and panel. Screen's yours, Michiel.
Thank you, Shada. Yes, so the words I really picked up on in the poll are the sort of blame Brussels culture, which I've heard a lot of complaints about in the 25 years that I've been in Brussels as well, and I think there's a danger that while this is absolutely right and there is a tendency to blame Brussels for everything that goes wrong, there's also a temptation to then fail to look at what Brussels doesn't get right. And I think we're always going to live with a situation where national politicians or regional politicians will try to blame the higher levels of politics, of decision making for their own problems. That's kind of inevitable in politics. But I do think there's a lot more that Brussels can do, that the institutions can do, to make themselves accountable and to rebuild trust. And clearly, there are many ways of doing that. I would say that the ethics issue is top of the list. There are still far too many problems involving ethics, whether it's revolving doors at the European Commission, lots of people joining the private sector without a cooling off period, whether it's the European Parliament, where there haven't been any ethics complaints acted on in the last 5 years by the ethics body there. Look at the commissioner hearings we had, where there are lots of ethics issues that come on the table that then get politicized and aren't looked at in an objective way. So we need an independent ethics body to deal with these issues and restore trust in that area of work. A second area I'll mention briefly is council transparency. That institution is still far too secretive. We need to know what's going on inside those council rooms, what's being discussed, who's saying what, so that citizens know what their governments are saying. And the final issue I'd mention as an example, which I think is very important, is diversity. Brussels is still an overwhelmingly male, white city, especially white. It needs to become much more representative of the EU population as a whole. And we also need to do a lot more to tackle issues of discrimination, of harassment in the institutions. That is not yet high enough on the list of priorities, and the Ombudsman can play a key role in making sure that this is addressed.
Thank you very much, Michiel. Just a very quick follow-up question for you. The Commissioner Šefčovič just announced an online portal. He called it the Electronic Access to Commission Documents, saying it would become operational in 2021. Do you see that as an important step forward in the search, the quest for transparency? Michiel? Okay, we can move on, and I'll ask Michiel to comment on that later on. Let's go to Alberto. Alberto, perhaps you can pick that up as well, because it's something that you've been quite supportive of as well. Better access, more transparency as regards documents. So your opinion on the Slido poll, and then your comments, please.
time. She has been contributing to telling the truth many times by somehow unmasking some of the attempts of governments, in particular through the Council, of depicting a reality that didn't necessarily exist. So this is an important space in which you could continue playing a role. At the same time, when you look at ethics, the Ombudsman, I agree with Peter, can already play a role, and she has been playing a role in denouncing and investigating, in particular, conflict of interest and revolving doors. But her role is not the role of taking decisions, just supervising whether the European institutions themselves are enforcing ethical rules vis-à-vis their own members. We have the story of the Ombudsman decision on the Barroso case, which was an important one because led the European Commission to take more seriously those rules by extending the so-called cooling off period. But this is not enough, obviously, and that's why the establishment of an independent ethics body is so important today, by putting an end to the fragmentation in not only the ethical standards writing across the treaties and different sources, but in the enforcement of those. More generally, I would say the power of the Ombudsman lies in its ability to turn its own limitations into virtue by leveraging on experimental approaches that look not only at peer pressure in a negative way, name and shaming, but also fame, but also name and faming, as the awards on good administration prove. This is more needed than ever. We need to play on social norms. We need to be able to have the Ombudsman to create and instill a new culture of socio-political norms when it comes to ethical standards the members of the Parliament and the Commission and other agencies are expected to comply with. So we need to pay attention not to transform the Ombudsman into yet another judicial entity. That's why I'm very careful in saying we shouldn't give legal power, legal binding power to his own decisions. This is not the nature of the exercise. The nature of the exercise is trying to understand how we can leverage even further on its own moral suasion of the office and trying to understand why 10% or 15% of our decisions today are not complied by. How we can leverage on this social norming formation that the Ombudsman Office has been creating in order to reduce that element. This is the challenge of effectiveness of the Ombudsman we need to discuss. And if we manage to get this right, obviously the effectiveness of the whole system and its complementarity in relation to the judicial system will grow. So this is the space that we need to focus on if we want to look into the future.
Thank you very much, Alberto. So a new culture of socio-political norms. Emily, before I come to you, I'd like to just go back to Michiel and then get a comment from Dolor. So, Dolor, Michiel, I had asked you a question, and I also wanted to congratulate you for bringing up the topic and the very important issue of diversity within the EU Brussels so wide bubble. So thank you for doing that from me personally, if you like. So Michiel, on this question of access to online documents that Šefčovič came up with, very quickly, please.
Thank you, Shada, also for the personal comment. And apologies, I couldn't speak earlier, even though I tried to. But of course, when it comes to access to documents, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Any steps that are taken by the EU institutions to make themselves more accessible are welcome. So that in itself is very good news. Of course, what is critical is what kind of documents citizens will have access to and when. Because one of the many complaints that we all see, for instance, from journalists, is that it can be very difficult to find out which documents exist, when they have been published or will be published, and exactly what they are about. So if this new online register deals with that as well and makes sure that there is not just better technical access to the documents, but also more comprehensive access to the documents that we want to know about and that citizens need to know about, then I think that's good news.
Thank you, Michiel. So I'll go quickly now to Peter and then turn to Emily. So Peter, I just had one quick follow-up question to what you'd said. First of all, if you want to comment on the ethics panel, please go ahead and do so. But also if COVID-19 has changed citizens' expectations of public administrations, very briefly.
Well, I think public administrations have taken on extraordinary powers as part of the COVID-19 situation, and therefore the need for transparency is greater than ever. If people are being asked to set aside freedoms in order for the greater good, so to speak, then it's really important that we understand what are the core issues. Just to give an example, in Ireland, for instance, the clinical advice available to the government is published through freedom of information. I think that's an important illustration of the role that transparency plays, not just in the good times, but in the challenging times as well. Now, I think my issue with any ethics framework is this: there have to be sanctions that are meaningful. Without meaningful sanctions, you can have decisions on ethical matters, but people will continue to flout ethical standards nonetheless. So you need a system that enables you to investigate thoroughly. You need a good set of standards against which investigations are conducted. But then when you come to judgment as to whether there's been a transgression of ethical standards, there has to be a meaningful conclusion and there has to be an outcome so that citizens can clearly see that politicians and senior officials are being held to account.
Thank you very much, Peter. So standards and then follow-up sanctions if required. Emily, there's some, obviously I want you to comment on the Slido poll, but I have some very interesting questions and comments coming in from our online participants. I think one of the things that really is important for you to tackle now is about the mandate of this ethics body that is being talked about. Several questions on that have come in. And then there's a question from also the Office of the Basque Ombudsman. And this is a very important question in today's world, is how do you reach out to vulnerable people who don't have access to digital services, poorer people, migrants, vulnerable people generally. And basically the question, Emily, really is how do you get the European Ombudsman closer to citizens, especially vulnerable groups? And we've seen how vulnerable people are during this pandemic, lockdowns, etc. So the screen's yours for your final comments, and then we will call this wrap up. Thank you so much, Emily. Screen's yours.
Indeed, Shada, actually I found that conversation and the contributions from the colleagues really interesting, and I think we're beginning to focus really on the issues that we need to consider if one begins to reimagine the role of the European Ombudsman in the years ahead. Just in relation to getting closer to vulnerable groups and so on, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that my office can do any more than it actually can. Most of the problems that are being experienced by vulnerable groups at the moment, whether it's housing issues, health issues, schooling, as Madame Montserrat mentioned, access to healthcare, access even to testing, those are our member state competences, and most of those issues are going to be dealt with by the national and regional ombudsman. But one thing I have done, and I want to intensify over the next few years, is to do more parallel investigations with the network, so that if there is an issue which relates to a member state competence, but also parallel with that, there is an EU competence that we can work together on those, and that's something we're going to be discussing later this afternoon. In relation to the Slido poll, I mean, yes, I suppose I was heartened to see that the Blame Brussels culture issue was number one. I agree with Michiel that, yes, well, we can't stop, identifying the faults with Brussels as well. Of course not, but one of the reasons that we did our big investigation into council transparency was precisely so that the way that legislation is agreed in Brussels with the member states, the Commission, the Parliament, and so on, is made much more visible to people, so they can see precisely the role of their own member states in the making of legislation. I would have put a higher value to the one that came last in the poll, just 3%, and that is revolving doors. And I think that's because perhaps, observing this within the Brussels bubble, I have a very strong sense of how damaging that practice is to the public interest, because it is essentially the monetizing of public service and one's insider knowledge by dint of being a public servant or a commissioner, member of parliament, and so on, and then using it to the for the benefit of the private sector, and that again feeds into what has been, I suppose, the overarching theme of many of the strategic investigations that I've done, is who is influencing the legislation that impacts on EU citizens. And that piece on revolving doors is a very critical piece of that. In relation to, I found very interesting the views on, binding powers, non-binding powers, and I very much appreciated Professor Alemano's understanding of what seems to be a weakness in the setup, in the nature of an ombudsman, is actually a strength. However, I would make a distinction between the normal matters that an ombudsman deals with and access to information, access to documents. And I think Peter Tyndall made a very strong case for that. And I think if I look at where I do get most pushback in relation to my recommendations, it is in the area of access to documents. And that is because the institutions continue to control the tap. They can decide whether there's going to be, a flood of information released, or they can turn it off and release nothing. And I think sometimes they reject even the recommendations that I make in relation to access to documents, because they simply, for whatever reason, don't want to release it. And they know that it's such a big deal to go to court that the vast majority of people are not going to do that. So I think there has to be a discussion around binding powers in relation to access to documents, because, and again, Peter alluded to this, the minister who brought in access, the freedom of information legislation to Ireland in the late 1990s knew that an administration will always try to keep secret a lot of the information it holds, and that an ombudsman simply making recommendations was not enough. So I think in the first instance, I think I know I want to have a conversation with the Commission and other institutions generally. At the moment, we're conducting an audit of the recommendations in this area that we've made over the last number of years. And armed with that information and that analysis, we want to have a conversation in relation to that. So certainly that is a very important area that we want to look at. In relation to the ethics body, first of all, that is a matter for the legislators to decide what sort of body they want to come up with. All I can say is that I would support whatever works, and I would hope that the experience that this office has had over 25 years in dealing with many of those issues should be put to good use. I mean, I agree that the single most important thing is that it be independent. I mean, if you take, for example, the ad hoc ethical body attached to the Commission at the moment, they're not independent in relation to being able to make a decision as to what to investigate. The Commission invites them to investigate. They don't have that independent oversight. I agree with Peter again in relation to sanctions. What tends to happen now is that it's either the nuclear option or nothing. There isn't a scale of sanctions in relation to what happens if people transgress either the staff regulations or the code. So you're either going to take a case to court, which would be a very big deal, or really the opportunities to do anything are very limited. So at the moment, obviously people are asking me my advice and asking about the experience over the last 25 years. We're feeding into that, and we're certainly willing to play any useful role that we can as the discussions continue.
Emily, thank you very much. But you know me, I have one final question for you. You made a very inspiring speech in the beginning, very, very interesting for someone like me who watches European democracy and the challenges it faces. And you said, let's reimagine the role of the European Ombudsman. And I just want you to tell me very, very quickly, because we're running out of time, how would you reimagine it? What's your ambition for this new vision that you have?
Well, I remember when I came into office first, and I was asked if I needed more resources or more money or all of that, and I said, look, I want to prove myself first, and I want to prove that the strategy that I am rolling out is a successful one, and I think demonstrably it has been successful, and I think the tangible results of that are there in terms of our increased visibility, impact, relevance, and so on. So I think we need to explore expanding the possibilities of the office, but I think as well the our contacts, the liaison that we have with civil society, again, as Professor Alameda mentioned, but also with the network of ombudsmen, I think is critical, because I think Europe, or Brussels, has entered much more into the daily lives of people in the member states, even than it would have done 25 years ago. And I think that's why I have set out upon this initiative in relation to parallel investigation. So I think that it's important at this point in my mandate, 4 years to go, that I start having big conversations with the Commission and the Parliament and the political leaders to invite them to look at our work, the value of the work, and to invite them to join us in the conversation about where we might go. I mean, I don't have any concrete answers at the moment. I mean, I think certainly in relation to, I do see, and I've discussed with my colleagues over quite a period of time, the problems that we have with access to information. I think that is a problem. It's a problem of transparency, and therefore that leads into a problem of legitimacy for the institutions generally. I think we have to explore the further links with the network, and of course we will consider some of the ideas that have been coming forward from civil society, from Professor Alamano and from Michael Hulton today.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you also to the panelists. And as you said, Emily, big conversations to look forward to, speaking more truth to power. More engagement with national ombudsmen, joint strategies, parallel investigations, and more interaction with civil society. Thank you to the panelists and to Emily and to all of you for this very fascinating and insightful discussion. Also, thank you for the conversation and the questions you sent us on Slido. This part of the day is over. And I would also like to say thank you to the technicians and to the interpreters. Thank you very much for following us on this very, very interesting journey that we've had over the last 90 minutes or so. Some of you I will have to say goodbye to now, because the public part of this conversation is now over. We're wrapping up this. But members of the European Network, I'll be facilitating the debate that we start here at 2 p.m. And there, of course, we will continue this conversation of the work of the Ombudsman, especially in this COVID-19 world and areas of future cooperation. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the panelists. And as I said before, the big conversation, speaking truth to power, continues. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
intercambios de buenas prácticas entre nuestros diversos.
I wish the European Ombudsman a very happy 25th anniversary, And I congratulate on 25 years of work for the citizens of the European Union. Your role is so important and so fundamental to ensure that our European institutions live up to the highest standards of good administration. With your help and with your contribution, we want to fulfill the expectations of Europe's citizens. I'm looking forward to our cooperation also in the coming years.
In questi mesi così difficili abbiamo sempre ribadito la necessità di avvicinare maggiormente le istituzioni europee ai cittadini e questo è quello che voi avete fatto dal 1995 ad oggi. E in questi 25 anni segnano davvero un traguardo importante che deve essere celebrato perché i vostri sforzi e i vostri obiettivi sono stati dedicati a migliorare la trasparenza, a rafforzare l'etica e la responsabilità, la qualità dell'amministrazione europea e la sua accessibilità a vantaggio di tutti. Condividiamo insieme lo stesso impegno, lo stesso obiettivo, rendere l'Unione Europea un posto in cui i cittadini si sentano al sicuro, dove abbiano la possibilità di sviluppare le proprie ambizioni, i propri desideri, un posto in cui i loro diritti siano sempre protetti e rispettati. Loro credono in noi, nella nostra amministrazione, nel modo in cui siamo capaci di rispondere alle sfide globali. La fiducia dei cittadini è fondamentale per il futuro della nostra Unione. Un'amministrazione moderna, trasparente, responsabile è essenziale per continuare a coltivare questo sentimento, a permettere lo sviluppo di quel senso di comunità di cui c'è tanto bisogno e di cui ci rendiamo conto nei momenti difficili anche che stiamo vivendo con la pandemia del Covid-19. Desidero ringraziarvi per la dedizione dimostrata in questi anni, voglio ringraziare la mediatrice europea per il suo costante impegno e il suo duro lavoro dal 2013. Il mediatore europeo è un partner e un amico del Parlamento europeo, per questa ragione auspico che le nostre istituzioni possano cooperare ancor più attivamente in futuro. Buon 25° anniversario e speriamo di poterci incontrare al più presto.
25 years ago, the Office of the European Ombudsman was established. On its anniversary, I want to highlight the great work that has been done over all these years, from maximum transparency and empathy with European citizens. The Ombudsman has proved to be an independent and impartial institution that has always promoted good public administration in the European Union. The European Ombudsman plays a fundamental role in the functioning of the European Union. It is, with no doubt, a pillar for a Europe of the people that we need to continue building. For the Committee on Petitions, which I have the honor to chair, the Ombudsman is a key player in serving citizens, listening to them and addressing their concerns through investigating complaints about European administration, working with national ombudsmen, improving transparency in the European Union's trade relations. It is a great responsibility that we must value and defend from the European institutions. I wish a great present and future of success. Your success will be the success of all Europeans.
El defensor del pueblo es tu escudo frente a posibles ataques a tus derechos democráticos. Es tu altavoz y tu apoyo para dar visibilidad a las injusticias. Es también la garantía de transparencia de las instituciones europeas y es tu aval de buena gestión en las administraciones públicas. El defensor del pueblo es tu derecho a defender tus derechos. Ejércelos.
The past 25 years have proven that the establishment of the Office of EU Ombudsman was a very big achievement. The role of the EU institutions, the complaints on maladministration can be addressed, is extremely important. My own experience of fruitful cooperation with the EU Ombudsman has a time span of 16 years, since I was first elected to the European Parliament, and then my choice was to enter the PT Committee directly dealing with the concerns of EU residents. My congratulations to Emily O'Reilly, your predecessors and the staff on this anniversary.
Over the last 25 years, the European Ombudsman has given a voice to the concerns of citizens and civil society. The Ombudsman's scrutiny is a great asset for all EU institutions and an essential tool to strengthen public trust in the regulatory system. Congratulations on the 25th anniversary.
The European Ombudsman has done great work in putting human and fundamental rights at the heart of her work for good administration in the EU. Looking to the future, I would like to see her increasingly move from human and fundamental rights promotion to protection. I would like eventually the European Ombudsman to be one of the guarantors of human rights for everyone in the European Union.
Happy 25th birthday. Democracy and the European citizens' trust need a strong ombudsman to uphold ethical and transparency standards in EU bodies like the European Chemicals Agency. Keep up the good work.
Data Protection Authority as the expert in the field of data protection and privacy, and the Ombudsman with the knowledge of what's going on among the people and what are the problems and how to fight with them in the court is probably the good road for the future.
The European Ombudsman does important work by bringing the European institutions closer to their citizens. I see the future of the European Ombudsman in complementing a case-by-case approach with promoting more something at the systemic level. Transparency will enable accountability of the EU institutions, thereby creating trust and narrowing the gap between citizens and their institutions.
Hello, good legislation needs accountability on all levels of policymaking. The Ombudsman plays a key role fighting for pluralism and democracy, checks and balances. We wish her even more impact and visibility. In the same time, I personally dream of less work for her and her team, because that would be a perfect world.
The European Ombudsman has done a huge amount to defend the citizens' right of access to EU documents. What is needed now is for the Ombudsman to have binding powers in order to continue to advance transparency and openness of the European Union.
If the European Ombudsman had not been created, it would need to be invented. Happy 25th anniversary, European Ombudsman. Thank you.